Huge culture change, from everything from even as much as changing the club badge, that's a controversial step. So, a whole new identity. But as well as them arriving, they also brought in another investor from the Mittal family, the Indian steel family. The son-in-law, Amit Bhatia, also joined the board. And he was very supportive of what we were doing in the community. And it was at that point that we had a conversation about moving football in the community into a charitable arm, the club's charitable arm, QPR in the Community Trust. And there were many reasons and benefits to doing that. And it was at that point that I was asked that I would take on that leadership role as CEO. And that was coming up to 14 years ago when we launched as QPR in the Community Trust. That was the journey into it. So being the sort of head of the department previous to that, but during quite a testing time when we were in administration, etc.
Hi and welcome to another episode of the Drive Phase podcast from Coordinate Sport. This is your show about sports founders, leaders and experts and the stories behind their business journeys. Really privileged to have just wrapped up a conversation with Andy Evans, who's the CEO of the QPR in the Community Trust. Fantastic conversation looking at kind of not only his journey in his career in sport through the trust, being there at the kind of the inception of QPR in the community, and then as they launched the charitable arm officially, and kind of his pathway through to becoming the CEO there, and all the work he's done over the last few years, and the journey from starting out with a small team out in the community, just delivering programs in schools and community settings, all the way through to now offering a massive suite of services across youth, mental health, public health, etc. We spoke about kind of his philosophies in terms of leadership and authenticity, as well as touched on the role the trust played with the various kind of challenges over the years, specifically the Grenfell disaster and how they kind of first responded to that. So yeah, really great. Enjoyed talking to Andy, and he's really transparent with us and shared his experience. So yeah, anyone looking at working in this sector and making a huge impact in the community would be a great listen for you. So yeah, hopefully enjoy the show. Okay, so yeah, I'm really excited to welcome Andy Evans to the show today. He is CEO of the QPR in the Community Trust. Trust currently working with more than 23,000 people aged between 3 and 90 years old to help them participate more in sessions in the community. Welcome to the show, Andy.
Thanks for inviting me on, James. Nice to meet you as well.
Pleasure's mine. I guess we were just talking previously just regarding the fact that you're a lifelong QPR fan, but I guess that started at an early age, I'm sure. And like we always do, trying to let our listeners get to know you a little bit better. Starting out with your childhood and school, what would you say is your kind of first sporting memory, if you're thinking back?
My first sporting memory, I reckon I was probably about 4 or 5, and we were moving into one of the big housing estates in Notting Hill, the Brunel estate. And while my parents were going to view the flat, there was a little boy kicking a ball up against the garage door, and I stayed down with him and his dad kicking a ball around against that garage door. That little boy, he's still one of my oldest friends. I just come back from New Jersey where he now lives, so we still see each other, and that friendship formed of us kicking that ball around in the estate. And then I remember playing for my school football team at primary school in Westbourne Park, and then just picking up on the point you said about the QPR connection. The estate behind me is the White City estate, and my gran lived there. So my other early memory is my dad taking me to visit gran, and then him bringing me into the stadium to watch QPR. So they're the earliest memories.
Coming into the stadium, what was your first game? How old were you? 6 years old?
I was 6 years of age when he brought me along. I believe we played Coventry City and it was a 0-0. So despite that, I seem to have fallen in love with it anyway.
Definitely going to touch on QPR being one of the clubs, I guess, one of those clubs which is literally in the heart of the community, right? So it'd be really good to touch on not just obviously being the heart of the community in terms of location, but all the work you're doing. In terms of school, though, if you're thinking back in primary school, and you mentioned there kind of playing for the school team, etc. But what was your experience like in school? Was it, and obviously things would have changed in terms of how sports delivered now, but were you always the sporty kid? And it sounds like it with the football in the estate, but what was your experience at school?
Yeah, I enjoyed school. I wouldn't say I was academically gifted, and probably sport and football in particular was the one thing that I was reasonable at. Although you can't tell on the podcast here with me sat down, but I'm a tiny guy. I'm not the tallest, but football seemed to be a way for me to form friendships. It also gave me a degree of self-esteem as well. That meant that a lot of my relationships were formed through playing football in particular. Although I did have a spell playing some basketball in secondary school, which I really enjoyed as well. But certainly sport, and in particular football, played a huge part in how I came to sort of self-identify as well, really. That stayed with me, and I had a teacher at primary school who was very much a sports fan, and he encouraged me to participate and play in the teams. And then we had the fabulous youth club not far from where I grew up called the Stowe Club, which was a big boys youth club. John Barnes went there, great player. And they had a great football setup, so I joined the Stowe Club and played at the weekends for them as well.
Nice, and I guess that one of my questions I was going to ask you about is kind of role models. It feels like those institutions, obviously school, youth club, and obviously the role that the club will be playing in the community now. But is there anyone who stands out in terms of role models? You mentioned your PE teacher or your school teacher. Is there anyone who kind of stands out as someone you remember from those days?
Yeah, I think once I went up to secondary school, which was St Augustine's, which is sort of Maid of Vale. There's a PE teacher there called Graham Hatch, and Graham, he only recently retired. He'd been there forever. And he really encouraged me to participate in sport, and both football and basketball and athletics. And, he really helped me instill a love for sport and playing in teams. Yeah, I always was very grateful to Graham for the support he gave me. And he went on to teach my sister and my niece and nephew as well. So he's been a constant in the family's life, to be honest.
You were talking about there in terms of academics and sport, so you find it pretty much a theme, really. Obviously, you've got that connection with sport. A lot of our guests have that kind of just early connection, and it kind of sits with them as a theme throughout their careers. But as you're coming through school and kind of coming to the end of secondary, did you have, what was the thought process at that point? Was there an aspiration to be, probably all of us wanted to be a footballer, right? But what was the kind of thought process there, leaving school and kind of your journey after that?
Yeah, I think I probably had those aspirations, but I think I realised early enough that I wasn't going to be good enough to go into a centre of excellence or an academy. But what the experience at secondary school in particular meant for me was that it really solidified my desire to want to work in sport. So when I got to school leaving age, we were one of the first sort of cohorts to do a sports studies A-level. It was quite theory based, but I went off and did that, and that was purely because I had clear ambition that I wanted to try and work in sport. So I went off and did the A-level, and alongside that I started to do some of my sort of level 1 coaching badges as well. Certainly the experience I had of sport in secondary school did encourage me to actually pursue wanting to work in that sector as well.
Obviously you talked about that A-level being kind of one of the first cohorts. Was there almost like a clear pathway into a role, or was it, do you know what I mean? So you've done the A-level, but did you know, right, these are the stepping? So like now there's quite a clear pathway, and speaking to previous guests around kind of the work that SimSpur are doing and the kind of this career pathway and guidance for the sport and physical activity sector. But then was there anything in place that?
No, definitely not. It was very much try to find your own way, and it was quite clear though that I knew that university wasn't going to be for me. So, on the completion of that sports studies course, for me, I was just keen to try and get my foot in the door somewhere, and that's exactly what I did whilst I was doing the sports studies course. I did write to a few London clubs to see whether there was any opportunities or roles. And Brentford Football Club at the time offered me just a bit of a match day role, really, doing anything and everything, which is what I did. I went along, volunteered, then, got a sort of a paid match day role, but I was literally doing anything and everything, from making the teas and coffees, going on the turnstiles, taking tickets, running things from A to B, answering the phones, stewarding a coach to an away game, anything that they needed doing. I was pretty open to it, and I just really enjoyed being on the inside of a professional football club.
How did that sit with the family then? I guess, I don't know if it's the biggest rivalry, but it's only around the corner, Brentford to QPR, West London rivalry. Did that go down well with the old man?
It was, because at the time, and it's starting to show my age, whereas now Brentford are obviously considered one of the rivals, but at that time, they were down in the third division. QPR were a first division team, so like the big rivalry for the family was Chelsea, really, at that point. It's sort of changed now because of the growth of Fulham and Brentford. So it was okay, and I think actually the family were quite pleased that I'd managed to get my foot in the door at a pro club, and I actually did that for a couple of years, and I went and got a full-time job elsewhere it was a warehouse job, but I continued to sort of volunteer and work on a match day at Brentford. Yeah, I was very grateful to the chief exec at the time at Brentford, a guy called Keith Loring. It was a small setup, so when I was in there, you really got to see how a football club operated, which was a great start for me, really.
So with that experience, so you're match day, but everything else, so you in and out of the changing room, seeing everything behind the scenes and all, what's and all kind of thing.
Yeah, it was like I say, it's a small setup, so every all the management, and I remember Steve Perriman was the manager. He had an office there, and alongside the chief exec and all the other department heads, it was all in a set of offices at the old Griffin Park Stadium. So you did get to see people up close and what was going on across all the different areas of the club. Really
keen to understand your kind of journey into QPR. I'm guessing at the time when you started officially working for the club, would have been really exciting for you being a fan. What was the stepping stone? So you mentioned you had your kind of full-time role, and you kind of got that volunteer / paid stuff on the match days. What was the journey from there to then getting involved with QPR initially it was box office, right? Was that your first role over there? Yeah.
I tell the story of Brentford to young people quite often because the reason I'm sat here now probably wouldn't have happened if I hadn't gone to Brentford and volunteered like I did and put myself in the sector that I wanted. Because what happened was that, as the chief exec I mentioned, Keith, he said to me, look, he knew that I was a QPR fan as well, and he said to me, QPR are recruiting. There's a few jobs come up. There's not going to be anything here at Brentford that is going to be coming up. So, I'd be happy to give you a good reference. And I wouldn't have known about the role at QPR if I hadn't been at Brentford. So, placing yourself in the sector you want to be and starting to network, it really paid dividends for me. And I was lucky enough to be taken on initially in the box office selling tickets, because I had some experience of doing that at Brentford. And that was the beginning of my journey at QPR.
So back then, so you started in the box office, was the kind of community trust, or the found, was that existing at that time, or was it purely directly for the club then, and all geared to obviously revenue, sales, etc.? That's where all the kind of funds were. So
QPR are a little bit slow out of the blocks with regards to community work, because round about that time, we're now talking about the mid to late 90s, the whole sort of concept of community outreach work delivered by football clubs was really starting to gather pace. Football as an industry was starting to become interesting again.
Premier League then as well, yeah, I guess you were Premier League at that point.
Yeah, Premier League was forming. We'd been through all the the disasters, and football was trying to change how it welcomed people into stadiums, and the sector was growing quickly. Brentford were one of the pilot clubs in terms of community outreach. They were already up and running, and QPR went and actually visited Brentford to see what they were doing in terms of their community work. And it was probably about 2 or 3 years into my time, probably 2 years, working at QPR, that the QPR decided that they were going to put in place a football in the community scheme. And as a result, there'll be a few post positions. Josephine Swift, who was tasked with sort of putting it in place, she knew a little bit about my background of doing sports studies, and I'd sort of got my sort of low-level coaching as well, and I expressed the desire that I'd be interested in that, so that when they formed QPR as a football in the community programme, I was lucky enough to be able to move across internally.
I guess at that point when you moved over, was it very much, did that suit you better in terms of being out in the community or delivery? Because I'm guessing there's a lot of delivery in that versus the box office being inside, just obviously ticket sales, etc. With your background, was it very much just bag of balls and getting out there to engage with the community, or structured programs in schools? So I know it's probably changed like night and day in terms of where you are now. Good to talk about that, but I guess where it all began, what was the remit then when you first started?
Yeah, exactly how you described it. Literally, get the QPR tracksuit on, here's some footballs, let's get out into the local schools, let's get out delivering football sessions in schools, football sessions in the school holidays, after school clubs, and try and get those young people that we're engaging with along on a Saturday to come and watch QPR. So it was all about taking the club out into the community. It was about getting children interested in playing football, and also looking to try and find the next generation of QPR fans as well. So that was very much the remit. So it was all about getting out there, and also we were starting to make connections with local authority as well, and working with sports development units. Yeah, lots of being out in school playgrounds with balls and cones and bibs.
What was the team size like then? Just as an idea of scale, because I know in terms of now, what was it like then in terms of the coaching team or the delivery team?
I think we were 4 football in the community officers, as we were titled then. And then we also ran like a traineeship program for young people who were maybe deemed to be long-term unemployed. So that probably doubled our workforce. So yeah, it was a very small team, mainly getting out there doing exactly what I said. We probably all had a number of schools each that we went out and delivered in, and then all came together during the summer holidays, school holidays, to deliver soccer schools as well. So
I guess the reception from the community, obviously something brand new, but was it welcoming? In terms of, I'm sure the schools would have welcomed you in there to help support with the PE and stuff like that, but was it a case of, was it hard work in terms of engaging with the community back then, or was it?
I think at that point, if I speak honestly, I would say that probably local residents and people in the White City estate may have felt that QPR wasn't accessible to them. I think by going out and starting to engage on the ground at community level, that was the beginning of, building the club back into being a community club, which is basically what we've been doing ever since that day. And as you said, it was a new concept, but there was lots of good learning that we could take from other clubs in other areas who had already been out there delivering to the community. So we took lots of good practice and advice from other clubs, not just in London, but across the country. And the whole network of football in the community as a movement was really starting to gather pace. And so we felt very well supported in terms of what we were doing and delivering.
Your journey personally as well, that's a success story. Probably when you're recruiting people now, you can always refer to the fact that obviously you're leading the organisation, CEO, but you started out in the same role as the majority of new starters, I guess, for the trust now. What was that we'll go into kind of what things look like now and the scale of the operation and stuff. But that, I guess, to round off the journey into becoming CEO, what did that look like? What was the pathway there?
The sort of scheme had grown during the late 90s, early 2000s. But that coincided with the football club also going into a really, really tough period where the club entered administration. And at that point, remember, we're still club employees. We're not a separate trust. We're football in the community, but we're embedded in the club and we're employed by the club, supported by the PFA, the Professional Footballers Association. So when we went into administration, that was tough for everybody within the club, lots of uncertainty, but we managed to survive. And then at that point, we get the first major investment into QPR in a long time when Bernie Eccleston and Flavio Briatore bought QPR. So all of a sudden there's serious investment coming into the club. And that was quite a difficult time internally.
Was that just like culture change then in terms of,
Huge culture change, from everything from, even as much as changing the club badge, that's a controversial step. So, a whole new identity. But as well as them arriving, they also brought in another investor from the Mittal family, the Indian steel family. The son-in-law, Amit Bhatia, also joined the board, and he was very supportive of what we were doing in the community. And it was at that point that we had a conversation about moving football in the community into a charitable arm, the club's charitable arm, QPR in the Community Trust. And there were many reasons and benefits to doing that. And it was at that point that I was asked that I would take on that leadership role as CEO. And that was coming up to 14 years ago when we launched as QPR in the Community Trust. And so that was the journey into it. So being the sort of head of the department previous to that, but during quite a testing time when we were in administration, etc.
And I guess if we're looking at the programmes now versus then, it's going to be hugely developed. But if you were going to give a bit of an overview in terms of the work you're doing, I always talked about kind of the classic in the schools and in the community, getting people just engaging on that level. But I'm sure now the kind of breadth of programmes you're offering, and we mentioned at the start, kind of 3 years to 90 years old. What would be the offer if you're going to, I guess, listeners to understand kind of what you're doing out there at the moment?
I think that one of the best ways to sort of describe the change in those early days that we've already spoken about, being in schools and all I was recruiting was qualified football coaches. That made up the main. That's what the staff looked like. But now I'm recruiting youth workers, social workers, nutritionists, people with an education teaching background, people from the youth justice sector. So the whole sort of skill set that we need has completely changed. So now we offer a lot more sort of one-to-one mentoring programs, hence the youth workers and people with youth justice backgrounds. So we do a lot of one-to-one mentoring with young people who get referred to us by the youth offending teams locally. So lots of one-to-one support for young people and trying to get them back engaged in positive activities. Right through to running quite a big college academy program where we've got over 100 students all doing BTECs, but also playing in an organised games program. So there's a whole raft of staff supporting those individuals. Right through to some of our oldest participants now are in their 90s. We had a Windrush event here last week where some of our extra timers, as we call them, they're part of the Extra Time Club. 3 of them are in their 90s. So, we're working with the older population here locally as well. Through to working with people with special needs. Down syndrome has been a focus for us over the years, and we're now the biggest provider of Down syndrome football in London. And also, we've been adept at trying to respond to what the local issues are. So, if there is something that is affecting our local community, in recent times that would have been COVID and the whole sort of, and now food poverty. So we're trying to help play a role where we can there. And obviously, we've also had one of the biggest disasters to affect the nation, let alone our little pocket of West London with Grenfell. So what role can we play as a community club to use football and the identity of QPR to help where we can with issues that are affecting our local community? That's what we try and do.
It'd be good to have your take on it. So as you've expanded, and it's a testament obviously to the work you're doing, to the profile of the club and the team you're building, but do you feel like some of those services you're providing, I hear it a lot with schools as well, in terms of you're having to provide more? Is it, I guess there's one hand, obviously you're growing the team and the profile of what you do, but also is it affected by certain cutbacks elsewhere in society, where, like you mentioned there, you're picking up, you're delivering youth programs or SEND program, all these type of things, where maybe in the past there would have been a service for that through the local government or whatever. Do you think that's just me being curious in terms of where that needs coming from, where that gap is that you're filling?
No doubt, we are now providing services that have disappeared, that other local authority are not providing anymore. So, and because of the success of football, and the reason I'm saying that is that in terms of where we get our funding from, we still, one of our biggest stakeholders, even though we're not in the Premier League, is the Premier League. So every time the TV deal gets done, we get a slice of that pie to then go and deliver programs here locally. And because of the success of that and the money involved, football, we've had the opportunity to sort of fill those gaps. So it's a mixture of us being able to access funding through football and starting to plug those gaps that have disappeared elsewhere. So like I said earlier, we're now employing youth workers, whereas in the past that would have been provided by the local authority.
How do you manage that then at the moment, in terms of, because there must be more things that you could do that you just can't, capacity-wise, bandwidth-wise, or you're in the community, you're seeing that, you're in the heart of it all. There's going to be projects or things where you could definitely make a difference if you got involved, but you can't because of whatever reason, whether it's bandwidth, capacity, or just you can't do everything, right? You've got to prioritise, I suppose.
Yeah, I think you prioritise, where are the needs, where, and also it's also about understanding where you can play a role as well. We learned something, a few years back. We tried to deliver a programme for war veterans. Our intentions were good. It was to try and support, a very vulnerable group in society, but we weren't equipped to deal and provide the support that those individuals needed. So we learned from that actually, it is about identifying the role you can play in the community and deliver a service that, does make a difference. We can't be the answer to every issue, but, there are certain areas where, because of our profile, because of the skill sets that we have internally, because of the experiences we've got, that does mean that, we've become a little bit better at identifying the areas where we can have the most impact.
I guess you're going to just food profile as well, if not the team, obviously, but you're going to open up a lot of doors, be able to engage, but then you've got to have those partnerships in place to refer or to support. So in terms of those partnerships, who would be who kind of your major or your key partnerships? Is it still local authority services or others that are coming in and supporting on those acute needs?
In terms of financial stakeholders, the Premier League through their Premier League charitable fund, and the EFL, the league, they're our biggest partners. Second to that, we now we work very closely with the NHS West London mental health team. So they have a number of desks here with us in our office. So they co-locate with us. So that's proven to be really beneficial to have mental health professionals sat in the office with our team, and we're starting to collaborate more closely. We're just about to launch a new partnership program called Advantage, which will be a program for 14 to 21-year-olds with mild or moderate mental health issues. And we'll do that in partnership with the NHS. So that's a key partnership for us. And then on a real local level, it's the youth offending teams in Kensington and Chelsea and Hammersmith and Fulham. We're starting that area of work for us in terms of referrals and working with young people one-on-one through our mentoring program. That's becoming a key partnership for us as well.
Talking a bit more operationally, obviously there's so many moving parts, so many programs, partners, everything to manage. What are the kind of the challenges, like the recurring ones that are just not going away, they've always been there, or you just keep having them? What are those challenges you have to work through every day running like the successful trust?
We've got a workforce of just over 100. It sort of remains around that mark. We're 40 full-time staff, 40 full and part-time staff members. The other 60 are the sessional workforce, and I think that's still a huge challenge for us in terms of, how do we retain sessional workers? How do we make them feel valued? How do we pay them the right rate? How do we raise the quality of what that sessional workforce looks like? So that's been an ongoing challenge for us, and one that actually we're on the cusp of making a significant change in how we manage that workforce. So that's always been an ongoing challenge.
Probably resonates with everyone listening in terms of managing, or people in general. Is always somewhere you've got to make sure you get right. But I was going to ask if there's any tips. Maybe you can't reveal that change you're making. But is there anything that you put in place to try and alleviate that challenge?
Yeah, the best appointment we've made in the last year is we've now got a dedicated workforce development manager. So they're tasked with improving the quality of what we're doing on the ground, but also to help support and upskill the sessional workforce as well as the full and part-time workers. But I think we're probably going to make some changes around, we have got those sessional workers are on sort of 0-hour contracts. So we are going to be looking at how can we move them onto something a little bit more permanent and secure, which will be good for the sessional workers. And we believe it will lead to a better quality of delivery as well.
Yeah, I guess for you as well, making sure you know what your capacity is as well, so you can flex it for all those other projects that are coming in. Over your time kind of leading the organisation, like you said, building it from its inception to now, so huge differences. Have you come across, do you have any kind of, or developed any approaches of business or leadership philosophies that you kind of live by, or the way you manage the organisation?
I think the thing I learned was to become more comfortable in your own skin as a leader and be yourself and be authentic. I believe I'm open and transparent, and that authenticity, I think, then coming from me, I hope leads to how we behave out in the community as well. I am interested in leadership and read lots of different books and podcasts and try and take learning, and I've been very fortunate enough to, over the years, observe leaders within the club. Some impressive individuals. Sadly, one of them has just departed from us, Les Ferdinand, someone who has really broken the ceiling for the black community in terms of being a director of football here at QPR, and watching Les operate both internally and how he represented us in the football world and beyond, and at community level, is an inspiration and something that I took a lot of learning from as well. But a word we try and use a lot here at QPR and the Community Trust is authenticity and being yourself. And I'd certainly that was one of the things I learned early on, is actually, by being yourself, you have far greater success in terms of where you want to get to.
Yeah, so much, I guess, easier to connect with people as well when they know you're kind of real, and you are what you say you are. Looking at the vision kind of for the next, let's say, 3 to 5 years out, obviously a lot of things changing, a lot of stuff in society and cost of living, etc., etc. So I can only see your role probably in the community, the organisations will probably growing just with what's happening. Do you have a vision of kind of where you want to be, what the next 3-5 years look like for the trust?
Yeah, I think we're just going through that process at the minute. We tend to work to 3-year cycles. The reason for that is the TV deal that provides us with a high percentage of our funding is a 3-year deal. So we tend to set our business planning to those cycles. We've had incremental growth in the whole 13-14 years that we've been a charity. We've got bigger in terms of our staffing, in terms of our turnover, in terms of how many people we're seeing and the impact that we're having. And we want to continue to grow incrementally. So more staff means more projects, means more people that we can impact. But I think the beauty of football clubs, community arms, is that actually we can flex quite quickly and pivot, which is what we've done with COVID, what we're doing with food poverty, and what we did around Grenfell. And I think football clubs do have that ability to pivot quite quickly without being too restricted. And so whilst we do have sort of set KPIs that we want to work to and where we want to grow, we also understand that actually, as the world changes and society moves, that actually there's going to be times when you need to react and play your part in trying to provide some help.
Just on that one, just as we're talking about it, is it possible to talk a little bit about Grenfell and what happened, like when that, obviously the disaster happened at the time, and obviously the ongoing ramifications of it still to this day, etc. Right, I guess for the people who haven't been to the area, obviously Grenfell, literally, 5-10 minutes walk away from the stadium, right in the heart of the community. And what was that like at the time? And obviously, I know you'd have been supporting the community, but what was on the ground? What was the initial impact, or how did it play out?
I mean, I'm from the area, as I described earlier on, and my sister's friend was in the tower. Natasha, she got out, and she's now the chair of Grenfell United. So my phone went very early that morning because my dad phoned me to say, have you seen what's happening? And I literally from there came straight into the club. Because it was the summer, we had loads of kit in reception. So I literally threw boxes of kit into the minibus, and we loaded up with mineral water. And 4 of us just went straight down to Grenfell, to the site, and along with everyone else thought we would help him, but it was just chaos. I mean, the only way I can describe it is it's what an earthquake disaster zone must feel like. It was just people everywhere.
So at this point, I guess it's still ongoing. Obviously, still trying to fight the fire.
Yeah, the fires. Yeah, it's still smoking, and it was organised chaos. But everyone there was trying to help, and there was an incredible show of what that community is like. It's strong community spirit. And we were down there all day, and then the news started to come through as to, the numbers, etc. And then we realised we lost 2 of our participants in the 72 from the El Wahabi family. Yassin did his work experience with us, and Nahuda, his little sister, was a participant on our girls programme at the Westway Centre. So that news started to impact staff who obviously work with them as well. And then we became a donation centre at the stadium. So thousands of stuff got donated. So the stadium was I ran a group of volunteers for a week where we had 60 volunteers coming in, sorting everything. And then the next stage was we knew that the families were in hotels. So we did a summer programme where we said to the survivors and the bereaved, if you're in hotels, bring the kids to us, drop them off. We'll entertain them all day while you try and sort out, your life. And then very closely after that, with Les Ferdinand, we started to talk about Game for Grenfell, where we did the big event here at the stadium. And then from there onwards, we've continued to sort of support and work very closely with the bereaved and the survivors. particularly where football can play a role. So we hosted the Grenfell Memorial Cup here, and I went up to St George's Park recently to manage the survivors and the bereaved team at the next Grenfell Memorial Cup.
And I guess that fallout, you mentioned there around the staff and developing their skill set. In that instance, no one's got the skills to deal with that right there, and then no one's seen it before. I guess moving forward and the fallout from it, that's probably impacting the type of work you're doing now, right? Like mental health is that disaster scene, as you talked about. There's going to be trauma, PTSD, all those type of things come like that you don't see at the time that are going to be coming out over a period afterwards, right?
Oh, you're spot on. You're going to start to see kids who viewed it as little uns, who were for weeks afterwards were walking past the tower every day. There's all the sort of connected trauma to it for the area, for those directly impacted, obviously, and those that were supporting those. So yeah, much more of a focus for us around mental health and making sure that we're, providing our staff with the tools to make sure they're resilient so that they can help those in the community that need help as well.
Well, normally I always ask about kind of any habits and things you have in terms of dealing with day-to-day stresses. Obviously that's a massive acute one that's happened. But in terms of that stress and the work you're doing out in the community, you're going to see a lot of things. Is there anything that you do personally to kind of keep coming back with a smile on your face every day and dealing with the stresses of day-to-day running the organisation, whether that's around your mental health or physical health and stuff like that? Yeah,
I do use affirmations in terms of helping myself to try and remain resilient. And recently I've started to use journaling as well. So yeah, sort of a couple of tools that I think just help me stay on a good level.
Yeah, it's trying to get that clarity as well, isn't it? In terms of so much information for you coming in, you got yeah.
Yeah, and I think what I would say is I've got tremendous team around me. I've got really good people here in the trust who support me as well in my role, and I try and support them in the role that they're doing, and likewise in the football club as well. I mentioned Les Ferdinand, but the club senior management team here, community is part of the central identity of QPR now, and so I get good support from the board of trustees and also the board of QPR as well. So and what I would say also is that the Premier League and the EFL, through the funding they provide us with, they also provide some good sort of CPD and leadership programs for people like me in my role, but also for my team who are in different roles as well. So we try and make good use of those opportunities as well.
Last question for me. We always have this one. It's a bit of a reflection, and you mentioned previously about authenticity and being yourself. If you're able to go back in time machine and speak to young Andy before he started his career, is just one piece of advice you'd go back and tell yourself, or maybe something you tell young people now?
I would say I wished I'd worried less and enjoyed it more, and that's part of the learning. Actually, is I certainly worry less now. I used to, that issues would come up, things would happen, and you take that home with you, keep you awake at night. And actually what tends to happen is all those things tend to work itself out. So yeah, certainly try and worry less and enjoy it more, because this is just one of the most amazing sectors to be involved in. Every day I feel very fortunate to be able to fulfill this role for the club that I grew up loving, and I couldn't be prouder working in a better community than the community of West London, which is where I'm rooted and where I'm from. Just try and enjoy it.
Thanks so much, man. Really enjoyed our chat. Thanks for being so open, transparent with us, and thanks for your time.
Pleasure. Thank you, James.